In the third year of my secret relationship with Oliver Wadeson, he suddenly announced his engagement. The bride wasn't me. Some insiders felt indignant for me, but Oliver smiled coldly. If you feel sorry for her, why don't you marry her this down and out? Later, when my grandfather was seriously ill and the company was in crisis, I was forced to announce my pregnancy and take over the family business. Miss Como, is the child Mr. Wadeson's? I smiled appropriately at the reporters. The child has nothing to do with Mr. Wadeson. I heard that on that day, Oliver was so furious when he saw me with a slightly bulging belly on TV that he smashed everything in the room. Later, someone photographed the most low-key and mysterious big shot in the capital, coaxing a woman in a busy street. Anthea, the child is almost 1 year old and will soon learn to call daddy. When will you give me a proper status? Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. When I pushed open the private room door, Oliver Wadeson was kneeling on one knee, holding a huge diamond ring to propose. But the proposal was not to me. In front of him was a young lady in a white dress, very beautiful and elegant. She was moved to tears, nodding and crying, "I do." I entered, and Oliver didn't even lift his eyes, focusing on putting the ring on the lady. It wasn't until the lady went to the washroom with her best friend to fix her makeup that Oliver looked at me indifferently. Connie is pure and timid. I put a lot of effort into pursuing her. As for our past, it's best not to let Connie know. And she has already agreed to my proposal. I plan to announce the engagement tomorrow. I had a secret relationship with Oliver for 3 years. Apart from the elders of both families, only a few people in our circle knew the details. As soon as he said this, the few insiders in the private room all looked at me. I took a deep breath. Oliver, can you temporarily not announce the engagement? Even if it's just postponed for a month? No, half a month. Oliver laughed, with a faint hint of ridicule in his eyes. Anthea Como, at this point, you're still clinging to me? Oliver, for the sake of our past feelings. Enough! Oliver suddenly smashed the wine glass in front of him with a cold face. During the 3 years, the Wadeson family has at least filled $3 billion of the Como family's deficit. Isn't that enough? I was speechless. Go back, so that Connie won't misunderstand the relationship between us when she returns. I stiffly turned around. As I opened the door to leave, I heard Oliver say to someone, "If you feel sorry for her, why don't you marry her this down and out?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. The Como family has indeed fallen, especially after my parents passed away. The company almost disintegrated. But Oliver also forgot that it was our fallen Como family that saved his and his grandfather's life years ago. Yet, he only resented the Como family for coercing him with gratitude. He resented me, whom he felt the Como family forced onto him. Oliver and Connie's engagement news quickly spread throughout the capital. Already seriously ill due to my parents' death, my grandfather was directly infuriated into the ICU. While I stayed in the hospital day and night to take care of him, my uncle brought people to storm the company. In the past, with the Wadeson family around, they were afraid to act rashly. Now, with me being an orphan without parents, they naturally had no scruples. In a brief moment of clarity, my grandfather grabbed my hand and said only one thing. Anthea, the company is your parents' lifetime effort. Even if it's destroyed, it can't fall into the hands of those ambitious wolves. I couldn't help but cry with red eyes. Don't worry, I already have a plan. My uncle insisted that a girl from the Como family couldn't inherit the business, using this as an excuse to seize everything from the Como family's main branch. But I would never let them succeed. The second week after Oliver announced his engagement, I made the most absurd, yet most important decision of my life. I needed a child to inherit the Como family's business. Because I didn't meet the conditions for IVF, I ultimately chose natural conception. As for the child's father, the butler, who had served my grandfather for a lifetime, placed the final selected information in front of me. Miss, please take a look. The man's information was very simple. From G City, took his mother's surname, likely from a single-parent family. His academic background was impressive, indicating high intelligence and good genes. A detailed medical report proved he was in excellent health without any hidden ailments. Most importantly, the face in the photo. It was so handsome it left one in a daze. Bob, Are you sure such an outstanding man needs to do this kind of business? I couldn't help but be a bit puzzled. Bob smiled kindly. It seems someone in his family fell seriously ill and urgently needed a large sum of money. I couldn't help but think of my grandfather still in the hospital and felt a pang of compassion. Add another 50,000 for him. Yes, Mississippi. The 12th day after Oliver announced his engagement. It also happened to be my fertile day. I met the man named Enzo Krause. He wore a very ordinary black shirt and long pants, with no visible brand, likely inexpensive supermarket clothes. But even such cheap clothes didn't look cheap on him. As stated in the contract, his eyes were covered with a black silk ribbon. When I pushed the door open, he instinctively stood up and looked towards the door. It was then I realized he was very tall, at least 6 feet 2 inches. He had a great physique too, with broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and long legs. Miss? Enzo Krause tentatively spoke. His voice was pleasant, and I felt even more satisfied. It's me, don't be nervous. I walked forward slowly and patted his arm. His muscles were also great. Did you take a shower? I asked. I did. I was actually so nervous that a thin layer of sweat had formed on my back. But I deliberately acted calm and composed. Then let's begin. Enzo Krause couldn't see me, but I could see him. After I said that sentence, his lips curved slightly. Facing me, through the black cloth, he nodded slightly. All right, Mississippi. His long fingers unbuttoned his shirt one by one. My face instantly turned red. I hurriedly turned around. The rustling sound of clothes stopped. The man's voice, hoarse and sexy, sounded, "Miss, it's done." I forced myself to look relaxed and natural as I turned around. But I suddenly widened my eyes. The long black silk ribbon fell from his neat short hair. His eyebrows were covered by the cloth, making his nose look even more prominent. Miss? Perhaps because I hadn't spoken for a long time, Enzo Krause called softly. He took a step forward, reaching out as if to find someone. His fingertips touched my shoulder. Somewhat overstepping, he gently held my shoulder. The next moment, he directly picked me up horizontally. My body sank into the soft bed. My heart was beating so fast that I felt dizzy and almost couldn't breathe. Enzo Krause lowered his head, the black silk ribbon falling, sliding across my collarbone. His cool fingers cupped my face, kissing lightly on my neck. Just as he leaned in closer, my phone suddenly rang. Enzo Krause instinctively stopped his movement. I straightened up and reached for my phone. Unexpectedly, I saw the name Oliver Wadeson. I hesitated for a moment but still hung up. However, the call came through again quickly. My gaze fell on Enzo's face beside me. The man's lips were thin, and I've heard that people like this are naturally indifferent. I was momentarily dazed, but indifference was good. Indifference was more suitable for this business. After parting ways, there would be no further entanglements. I pressed the answer button. Oliver's voice sounded somewhat unfamiliar in my ear. Anthea, why didn't you tell me that Grandpa was hospitalized? This isn't a secret. Where are you now? I'll pick you up and we'll go to the hospital to see Grandpa together. No need. Anthea, Grandpa was very good to me. I want to make sure he is at peace during this time. I said, no need. Thank you for your kindness. Anthea, you should understand the principle of not going overboard when throwing a tantrum, right? Oliver's voice was already tinged with barely suppressed anger. I understood him. For someone as arrogant and conceited as him to take the initiative to call me and show goodwill was rare. But it's really unnecessary. After all, it's already too late. I clutched my phone and looked at the man in front of me. Oliver. Before I could finish, Enzo Krause suddenly spoke in a deep, hoarse voice, Miss? A scorching kiss once again landed on the corner of my lips. The phone slipped from my grasp and fell to the floor. I frowned and let out a light hum of pain. Oliver's voice rang out, fragmented and chaotic, Anthea, who the hell are you with? The screen went dark. Enzo leaned down, exceptionally gentle yet overwhelmingly forceful. He kissed my lips. What followed was only natural. Enzo Krause was very considerate of my feelings, so gentle that it made me think I was the lover he cherished in his heart. In the middle, I had a moment of unconsciousness. So I didn't know. At that moment, Enzo pulled off the silk blindfold covering his eyes. In the dimly lit bedroom, he looked at my face, kissing down from my brow, inch by inch. The next morning when I opened my eyes, I found myself already changed into clean, soft pajamas. The other side of the bed was empty. As if everything that happened last night was just an illusion. I struggled to get up and wash, and when I went downstairs to have breakfast, Bob told me that Enzo Krause had left last night as per the contract. I sat down at the dining table, thinking about his presumptuousness last night, thinking about how I lost control and followed him into the abyss. The nape of my neck couldn't help but feel a little hot. Did you give him the money? According to the agreement, 1/3 has been paid, and the remaining part will be given to him once you confirm the pregnancy. I nodded and said no more. Intercontinental Hotel. Enzo Krause had long changed out of his cheap clothes. He finished swimming in the private pool on the top floor. The butler from the old house was already waiting in the living room. Madam knows you are in the capital these days and wants you to have dinner together tonight. Enzo casually threw the towel aside and chuckled. Her aim is not what it appears to be. You'll be 28 after the new year, it's no wonder Madam is anxious. Enzo walked to the refrigerator and casually took out a bottle of water. His wet black hair was casually swept back, revealing a square forehead and long, slanted eyebrows. What's the rush? In a few days, she might become a grandmother. Enzo took a sip of water and joked with the butler who had watched him grow up. The butler was startled. My dear young master, you can't play such a big game. Our Fisher and Krause families have only you as the heir. The future young master or young miss will be more precious than gold nuggets. How can you be so casual? The future young mistress must be married with proper ceremonies. I know, of course. Enzo sat down on the sofa, his eyes lowered to the still clear bite mark on his left arm. Thinking of that night, a gentle expression gradually spread across his face. Things don't always go as planned. My period was only a day late, but it still came as usual. I came out of the bathroom and sat on the sofa, feeling a bit dejected. The turmoil outside was growing more intense, and Grandpa had fallen into a deep coma. The doctor said he could hold on for at most a month. I called Bob over. Get in touch with Enzo Krause. Next month, let's try again. Yes, Mississippi. I stood up and took a few steps towards the door but then stopped and looked back at Bob. Make sure to explain the rules to him clearly. If it weren't for the fact that I didn't want to face another completely unfamiliar man again, I probably wouldn't seek out Enzo Krause again. After all, that night, he crossed the line more than once. The day before meeting Enzo Krause again, I ran into Oliver Wadeson at a party. To my surprise, he wasn't with his fiancée, Connie. As soon as I saw him from a distance, I looked away. Today was Mrs. Sadaka's birthday, a family friend. I chose to attend because I wanted to reconnect with my parents' old friends. However, it was clear I was being naive. I had long understood the saying out of sight, out of mind. But today's experience made it even more evident. Although my relationship with Oliver was a secret, there are no secrets that time does not reveal. During those 3 years, it was only because of the Wadeson family's influence that I had a foothold. But now that Oliver had announced his engagement, I was just an orphan with no support. Who would still look at me kindly? My raised wine glass awkwardly stayed in the air for a long time. It was only then that Mrs. Sadaka seemed to notice me and clinked her glass with mine. But clearly, she had no intention of making small talk. Naturally, I wouldn't embarrass myself. After making the toast, I went to a quiet corner. Being treated so coldly and without face, my mood was utterly terrible. Unknowingly, I drank a few more glasses. I hadn't noticed when Oliver walked over. Anthea Como, he looked at me with his usual superior air. But I no longer tried to cautiously maintain my relationship with him as I did before. Mr. Wadeson, I greeted him coolly and was about to leave. Oliver stopped me. Anthea, I visited Grandpa a few days ago. His condition is not good. Yes, the doctor has spoken to me about it. Oliver's voice seemed a bit gentler. Anthea, I've also heard about the recent troubles with the Como family. What does Mr. Wadeson want to say? I looked at Oliver calmly yet distantly. In my youth, I was truly naive and foolish. I thought that since we had known each other since childhood and grown up together, and since the Como family had been so kind to his family, he would surely treat me well. But I completely ignored the fact that if a man doesn't like you, no amount of kindness can bind him. And our Como family expecting gratitude in return was also a petty act. In the end, Oliver didn't really owe me anything. After all, love is something that cannot be forced. Oliver slowly took a step forward and gently held my hand. Anthea, if you weren't so stubborn, I might have helped you. Help me? Yes, after all, your Como family saved my grandfather and me. Oliver chuckled. I've been waiting for you to give in these past few days. Anthea, after all these years of our relationship, I wouldn't really ignore your life and death. Oliver, just say it straight, what do you want? I won't marry you, but we can maintain our previous relationship. I looked at Oliver with some surprise. After all, that night he proposed to Connie with such sincerity and deep affection, it was truly moving. So it was all just an act. You already have a fiancé. So what? In our circle, who doesn't have a close male or female friend? Oliver looked at me arrogantly and confidently. Anthea, given the Como family's current situation, you know what choice to make. Being with me will only benefit you. Oliver Wadeson. I interrupted him with disgust. Before today, I didn't actually hate you at all. On the contrary, I was reflecting on how our Como family was being petty and leveraging our kindness to force you. But now I don't think that way anymore. You're nothing but a complete scumbag. If our Como family knew that the person they saved was an ungrateful wretch and a total jerk, they would definitely regret their act of kindness. Anthea, venting your anger with words won't do you any good. Think about your parents' hard work. If the company really falls into your hands and is ruined, how would they feel if they knew? If my parents knew that I had to be your mistress to save the company, they wouldn't forgive me even in the afterlife. Anthea, you'd better think it through. You know I won't give you a third chance. I picked up my wine glass and splashed it directly on his face. Get lost. Oliver's face turned livid, clearly furious. I was even prepared for him to hit me. After all, someone like him, who had always been favored, had never been treated this way. Anthea, I'll wait for the day you regret it, the day you come back crying and begging me. After saying that, Oliver turned and walked away. There were murmurs of discussion all around. I stood there, as if I hadn't heard a thing, and turned to walk outside. As soon as I got in the car, Bob's call came through. Miss, the person has been picked up. Got it, I'm heading back now. I hung up the phone and looked at the pitch-black sky outside the car window. If I can't get pregnant tonight, I really won't have much time left. The car stopped in front of the villa. The light in my bedroom was already on. I got out of the car, refusing any help, and staggered up the stairs alone. Enzo Kraus was sitting quietly on the sofa with his eyes covered, just like last time. I pushed the door open and leaned against it, drunkenly eyeing him. Tonight, probably because I had drunk a lot of alcohol, my emotions suddenly got out of control. Miss? Enzo must have heard me push the door. He turned his face towards me, looking through the silk band covering his eyes. I walked towards him step by step, my gaze also falling on his face and body. The air was filled with a faint, refreshing scent of post-bath cleanliness. The clothes he was wearing were obviously not his own, they must have been prepared by Bob. They were clearly of high quality and suited him well. Enzo Kraus stood up. He was a full head taller than me. Especially now, as I kicked off my high heels. Standing in front of him, I felt somewhat lacking in presence. I slightly stood on tiptoe and grabbed his lapel. Enzo Kraus, who allowed you to kiss me? Who gave you permission? Miss? You still remember I'm the miss, your benefactor? Enzo Kraus seemed to laugh lightly. Yes, Miss is right, I overstepped. Dare to do it again? I wouldn't dare. I patted his face with satisfaction. You're obedient, I like that. As long as Miss is happy. But I let go of him and took a step back, looking him up and down. Are you impotent? Otherwise, Why haven't I gotten pregnant? I saw Enzo Krause clearly freeze for a moment. I'm giving you one last chance. If I still can't get pregnant this time, Enzo Krause, I patted his handsome face again, I'm gonna have to find someone else to replace you. If there were a regret medicine in this world, I would never have let myself speak recklessly that night. Especially not to question a man's abilities. The consequence of doing so was, that entire night, Enzo Krause almost wore me out. He not only kissed me countless times but also forced me to kiss him actively. If it weren't for me crying and begging him pitifully at the end, he might not have let me go. But the effect of that night was obvious. Grandpa was announced his critical condition again. When the side branches of the Como family blocked me at the company, forcing me to hand over the company seal, I directly contacted the media and held a press conference. At the press conference, I publicly revealed my pregnancy report and declared that the child would take my Como surname and inherit the business left by my parents. After a brief interview with the reporters, I received a call from Oliver Wadeson. He was obviously furious on the phone, his voice hoarse. Anthea Como, I've never touched you. Where did the child in your belly come from? Is this a scheme you deliberately orchestrated? I could understand Oliver's anger. After all, counting the days, I was 5 weeks pregnant today, and it had only been 3 months since we broke up. Of course, you never touched me, and I never said the child's father was you. I walked into the elevator, looking at myself in the elevator mirror. Oliver Wadeson, we broke up long ago. Our matters have nothing to do with each other anymore. Please, don't call me again in the future. Anthea, are you really pregnant? Who is the father? Tell me clearly. I did not answer. After hanging up the phone, I deleted his number directly. From now on, this would be my biggest secret. That man named Enzo Krause had already taken the money I gave him and returned to G-City. We would never meet again in this lifetime. In May of the following year, I gave birth to my eldest son, Carl Como, in the capital. Contrary to what I had imagined, he did not look very much like me. Bob said that Carl's brows, eyes, and jawline looked exactly like Enzo Krause. When I looked at him, I often felt dazed. Back then, I had Enzo Krause blindfolded so he wouldn't know what I looked like. So he wouldn't know my identity. But Bob had seen him. Since he said so, it couldn't be false. So, Enzo Krause's brows and eyes were like this. Even though he was blindfolded, I could vaguely see that he was very handsome. And a man like him, once out of his predicament, would have a boundless future. For such a past that couldn't see the light of day, he must want to forget it even more than I do. So, I don't need to worry about him suddenly coming out to fight for the child. Nor do I need to worry about meeting him again. But every time I see Carl, I still think of those 2 nights. In this life, maybe he will be the only man I ever have. Maybe I will only have those 2 nights of joy. At Carl's 1-month celebration, the mysterious Fisher family from the capital sent a valuable gift. I was somewhat surprised. Even the prosperous Wadeson family couldn't compare, let alone the Como family, which was no longer as influential as it used to be. There had never been any interaction between the Como and Fisher families, and it was impossible for us to associate with them. Why would the Fisher family send such a valuable gift? What surprised me even more was that at Carl's 100-day celebration, Mrs. Fisher herself visited. She even invited me to a small gathering 3 days later. I felt very anxious but also very puzzled. However, Mrs. Fisher was a very gentle and kind elder, and she seemed to have no ill intentions towards me. Especially towards Carl, she was very fond of him. During her visit, besides giving me a gift, she also prepared a generous 100-day gift for Carl. When she left, Mrs. Fisher held Carl lovingly, reluctant to let go, looking back several times with longing. This made me even more suspicious. So, when I went to the appointment 3 days later, I specifically asked Bob to stay at home to look after Carl. Then I took my assistant and driver to Mrs. Fisher's private club. As soon as my car stopped, several people eagerly came up to greet me. "Miss Como, please come in, our madam has been waiting for you." "Yes, madam instructed us to wait for your car outside." "Thank you for your trouble." I smiled and thanked them, following them to the flower hall. Unexpectedly, I saw a dark gray Bentley slowly stopping not far away. The driver ran to open the door. A tall man got out of the car. Through a row of flower trees, I could only vaguely see a side silhouette. My heart skipped a beat for no reason. Even my steps paused. I had never seen Enzo Krause in daylight or bright light. But this silhouette seemed inexplicably familiar at first glance. Then, I couldn't help but deny it in my heart. Enzo Krause was from G-City. His mother was also from G-City. Back then, Bob chose him precisely because he wasn't from the capital, but far away in G-City. He wouldn't suddenly appear in the capital. But the capital doesn't belong to the Como family, and I don't have the power to keep Enzo Krause from setting foot here for a lifetime. Even if he came to the capital, it wouldn't be surprising. But, could it be him? Miss Como? Someone beside me called softly. I came back to my senses and quickly followed their steps. Does Mrs. Fisher have other guests today? The person in front of me smiled warmly. It's our young master who just returned to the capital. Saying that, he pointed to the Bentley. That's the young master's car. So the person just now was Mrs. Fisher's only son. Mrs. Fisher also married into the Fisher family from G-City to the capital. Her only son naturally bore the surname Fisher. So it wasn't Enzo Krause. I breathed a sigh of relief. But inexplicably, I felt a bit of indescribable disappointment. This disappointment made me laugh at myself. Why should I feel disappointed? Could it be that deep down, I was still hoping to meet Enzo Krause? It was just a transaction between us. Once the transaction ended, it should have been completely over. Thinking this, I still felt somewhat dazed. When I entered the flower hall, I heard some laughter inside. It was probably Mrs. Fisher talking to her son. I instinctively looked up and met the man's eyes. They were eyes I had never seen before. But they seemed as if I had seen them countless times. My heart stopped for a moment. Even my thoughts seemed to freeze. Miss Como is here. Mrs. Fisher got up with a smile and came over, holding my hand and leading me to sit down. She then instructed the servant to serve tea. Enzo, this is Miss Como. Mrs. Fisher looked at her son and then at me, smiling even more. Miss Como, this is my unworthy son. Miss Como, I've heard so much about you. Enzo Fisher walked up to me, extending his hand. My heart started beating, gradually becoming intense. My mind was still blank, but a buzzing sound began to ring in my ears. I didn't respond politely, nor did I extend my hand to shake his. Instead, I somewhat rudely looked at Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, what did you just call him? Mrs. Fisher was a little surprised, but she still smiled and said, his name, Enzo Fisher. I blankly repeated, Enzo Fisher? I looked at the man in front of me. His build was almost identical to Enzo Krause. If his brows and eyes were covered, leaving only his nose and lips exposed. My body suddenly swayed lightly. Miss Como, Enzo Fisher quickly reached out to support me. But I pushed him away. I raised my hand and gently covered his eyes. Exactly the same. I remembered our first night together. I had thought then that Enzo Krause's lips were a bit thin, and people said men with thin lips were ruthless. But to me, being ruthless was good. Being ruthless suited this transaction better. But if Enzo Fisher was Enzo Krause, why did he deceive me like this? He was clearly born with a silver spoon in his mouth, an unattainable wealthy young master. Yet he pretended to be a poor student. Even entered into such an absurd transaction with me. Fine, even if he was seeking amusement, finding it fun and exciting. Once the transaction ended, we would part ways completely. Why did he suddenly appear in front of me again? Suddenly involve himself in my and my child's life? At this moment, I seemed to understand why the Fisher family sent a full moon gift. Why Mrs. Fisher personally visited on Carl's 100th day. And why she loved Carl so much. Because they all knew Carl was Enzo Fisher's child. They wanted to take my child away. When my hand fell from covering Enzo Fisher's eyes, tears suddenly broke free. Enzo Fisher was clearly flustered. Anthea. He instinctively raised his hand to wipe my tears. But I pushed his hand away. Sorry, I'm not feeling well, I'd like to go back. Miss Como, you don't look well, let Enzo take you home. I raised my hand to wipe away my tears. Looking at Enzo Fisher in front of me, I couldn't help but laugh. Should I call you Enzo Fisher or Enzo Kraus? Anthea. I didn't stay any longer, grabbed my bag, and turned to leave. Mrs. Fisher and Enzo Fisher both chased after me. But I didn't want to stop for even a moment. All of this, it was too sudden, I couldn't accept it. I felt like a clown kept in the dark. Anthea, can you listen to me for a few words? Enzo Fisher grabbed my wrist. Without thinking, I shook him off. If I remember correctly, the contract was very clear. After the transaction ended, there shouldn't be any ties between us. You took the money, you have to abide by the agreement. Mr. Fisher, I don't care if you're Enzo Kraus or Enzo Fisher, our relationship ended completely last year. I don't care what you want to do suddenly appearing in front of me now. I took a deep breath, gradually calming down. In short, I have only one thing to say: the child is mine, his surname is Como, and he has nothing to do with you. No one should think of taking him from me. Anthea, I never intended to take the child. Fine, since that's the case, then it's my fault for being suspicious. Pretend I didn't say anything. Can I go home now? Maybe my state was really too bad. Enzo Fisher didn't stop me anymore. Mrs. Fisher later called me several times, but I never answered. Enzo Fisher also came to visit the Como family. I didn't see him. Carl grew up day by day, just as Bob said. His eyebrows and eyes looked exactly like Enzo Fisher's. And I also learned some things about Enzo Fisher from Bob. He is the only son of his parents. In both his maternal and paternal families, he is the only child. He has two identities. In G City, he is Enzo Kraus of the Kraus family. In the capital, he is Enzo Fisher of the Fisher family. Actually, it wasn't really deception from the beginning. Enzo Kraus is indeed his real name. But thinking back to those scant memories, I feel embarrassed. He is the only young master of both the Kraus and Fisher families. Back then, I even felt sorry for him, wanting to give him an extra $500,000 as compensation. When he got the money, did he laugh at my foolishness? Sometimes I really can't understand. A person like him, who can have any woman and seek any thrill, why did he choose to toy with me? He said he had no intention of taking the child away. But I wouldn't be naive enough to believe that. Both the Fisher and Kraus families have few descendants. Even if Enzo Fisher doesn't care about the child, the elders of both families might not feel the same. What if they really wanted to fight me for the child? I don't dare to imagine the consequences. Because the consequences are obvious. It would be like an ant trying to stop a carriage. Although I refused to meet with anyone from the Fisher family, Enzo Fisher still silently permeated my life. The Fisher family indeed did not show any intention of fighting me for Carl. On the contrary, the gifts they sent for me and Carl were almost daily and unending. Even if I refused to accept them and shut them out, they still persisted. Sometimes even Bob would try to persuade me. He said, for a family like the Fishers to lower themselves in this way is truly rare. When he said that, Enzo Fisher was waiting downstairs. The capital September was still unbearably hot. It was almost noon, and the sun was scorching. Enzo's forehead was sweaty, his suit jacket draped over his arm, and the back of his shirt was soaked. Miss, I always feel that the Fisher family doesn't have any underhanded thoughts. And this Mr. Fisher, he doesn't seem like a bad person either. Bob looked downstairs, seeming a bit sympathetic. Miss, you've seen it yourself over the past month. Honestly, with Mr. Fisher's background, if he really wanted to do something, why would he go through so much trouble? I couldn't help but look downstairs. Enzo had been standing there for almost 2 hours. The heat was still intense. If something really happened to him. Thinking of Carl, thinking of his identical eyebrows and eyes. In the end, I softened. Invite him in and ask the kitchen to prepare some cooling tea. I spoke gently, my gaze falling on Enzo's handsome and dignified face. After a while, I finally looked away. I'll go down later and have a good talk with him. Bob happily went downstairs while I sat upstairs for a moment. I changed into a dress and went down. Enzo was sitting in the living room drinking tea. When he saw me coming down, he put down his teacup and stood up. Miss Como. I asked the servants to leave and got straight to the point. Mr. Fisher, let's have a good talk today. What exactly do you and Mrs. Fisher want with all this? Enzo looked at me without speaking for a long time. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the birds in the cage under the eaves occasionally chirped lazily. In the distance, it seemed like Carl was crying, but then it stopped, and everything was silent. The air conditioning was on in the house, but I felt a mess inside, unbearably restless. Just when I couldn't stand it anymore and was about to ask him to leave again, Enzo suddenly spoke. Miss Como, I want to marry you, in a formal ceremony, with a grand procession. I was stunned. The teacup in my hand almost fell to the ground. But Enzo continued, Miss Como, this idea is not a spur of the moment, nor a decision made after weighing the pros and cons. Then what is it? Enzo smiled faintly. Anthea, do you remember, 20 years ago, you and Mr. Como saved some people at sea? Of course, I remember, but I was only a few years old at the time. Later, Grandpa often talked about it, so I remember it to this day. And Oliver Wadeson and his grandfather were the ones our private yacht rescued. I was also among those saved. But Grandpa never mentioned you. Because I was taken out to sea by a cousin at the time. He was afraid our family would find out and hold him accountable, so he hid my identity. I was only 8 years old then, terrified at sea, almost losing my life. In the end, I only remembered that the yacht had a Como character on it. As Enzo said this, his voice suddenly softened. And also, a very small, very cute little girl gave me a cup of hot water. Anthea, I have never changed this idea all these years. I want to find that girl and marry her. Enzo had been gone for a long time, but my mind was still in turmoil. I called Bob into the study. Bob, how did you find Enzo in the first place? Miss, actually, Enzo Kraus approached me first. Bob seemed a bit hesitant to look at me. At that time, I had already picked out 2 candidates for you and was about to send the information over. But Enzo Kraus's profile and resume were so impeccable that I was privately very partial to him, so I added him to the list. I didn't expect you to choose him too. I felt both exasperated and amused. He was indeed confident. Didn't he ever consider what if I hadn't chosen him? It was then that I remembered that I had indeed seen his photo back then. In the documents Bob sent over, there was his ID photo. I was really attracted to his face at first glance. Bob, what do you think I should do now? Miss, you're not even 25 yet. When you said you wouldn't get married again, I was actually against it in my heart. You're still so young, with plenty of youth ahead of you. If Mr. Fisher is sincere, you might as well give it a try with him. Besides, the Fisher family doesn't intend to take the child away, they seem very earnest to me. Bob sighed affectionately. I know you were hurt by the Wadeson family and that scoundrel Oliver Wadeson, but there are still good men in the world, aren't there? But he lied to me. Why didn't he come to me directly and say he wanted to repay us? He had many ways to repay the favor, why did he have to do it like this? Bob couldn't help but laugh. It's because you were too hasty, Mississippi. If Mr. Fisher hadn't intervened back then, you would have chosen someone else and things would have been set in stone. This was a stopgap measure. Mr. Fisher was afraid he would miss the chance and regret it for life. I grabbed a pillow and buried my face in it. But I'm just angry. And I hate him. Why should I give him a chance? Even if I want to date someone, it might not be with him. There are plenty of good-looking, excellent men in the capital. Bob couldn't help but chuckle. All right, miss, you can date whoever you want. But despite saying that, Bob still sided with him once. As soon as there was any sign of movement on my end, Enzo would know immediately. Even when I was just sitting in a cafe with a date. Enzo's Bentley would be parked on the street. Although neither of us was married. For some reason, when his car stopped, I felt like I was caught red-handed. Enzo didn't disturb me. He didn't even get out of the car. But I felt uneasy and had to come up with an excuse to send my date away first. As the sky darkened, I picked up my bag and walked out. Enzo got out of the car too. The streetlights began to illuminate one by one in the twilight, and he was bathed in the shimmering light. I deliberately pretended not to see him. I walked straight along the street. I didn't look back even when I reached the intersection. But I knew he was definitely following me. When the green light came on and I was about to cross the crosswalk, Enzo gently grabbed my wrist from behind. A cyclist sped past me. Enzo pulled me in front of him. Winter had arrived in the capital. He was wearing a navy blue thin trench coat, and I was wrapped in it entirely. Anthea, he called my name softly. As the night breeze blew, he raised his hand to tidy my messy hair. I noticed someone around seemed to be secretly taking photos. In fact, in recent days, I had heard all sorts of rumors about the Fisher family and Enzo Fisher. He spent most of his time in G-City, and when he was in the capital, he was always very low-key and mysterious, with unpredictable whereabouts. But lately, he had been visiting my house too frequently. So much so that he caught the attention of gossipers and paparazzi. Enzo, it seems someone is taking photos. I tried to push him away. But he simply let go of my wrist and directly hugged my waist. Anthea, he lowered his head slightly and coaxed softly in my ear, Carl is almost 1 year old. He will soon learn to call daddy. When will you give me a proper status? Those photos and videos were spreading like wildfire in the capital. Some people, with too much time on their hands, even started lip-reading Enzo to figure out what he said to me at that moment. Even Oliver Wadeson came to the Como family once. It was really strange. He loved Connie so much back then, but it's been almost 2 years since they announced their engagement, and they still haven't had the wedding. I met him in the living room. Oliver got straight to the point, is the child Enzo Fisher's? I didn't answer and asked him back, what does it have to do with you? Anthea, Enzo Fisher comes from an excellent background, and both the Fisher family and his maternal family have only him as their sole heir. What do you think his purpose is in approaching you? He just wants to take the child away. Whether it is or isn't, what does it have to do with you? Anthea, I'm thinking for your sake, afraid you'll be deceived and end up suffering. What can he deceive me about? What if he wants to take Carl and change his surname back to Fisher? You're overthinking it. Enzo arrived quickly, thanks to Bob tipping him off again. I leaned back on the soft sofa, comfortably sipping hot tea. Enzo walked into the living room, covered in wind and snow. The servant quickly brought his favorite dragon well tea. He sat down beside me, looking at ease as if he were at home. Oliver's face showed some embarrassment, but he still insisted. Is it possible Mr. Fisher doesn't have such thoughts? Carl is your child, and a son at that. Even if you don't want to take him away, wouldn't the elders of the Fisher and Kraus families? I held the teacup, watching the tea leaves float and sink. This was a point of curiosity for me too. But I had never asked Enzo. Enzo lowered his head to drink tea, the crisp sound of the cup lid clinking. The warmth inside contrasted with the heavy snow outside. I put down the cup and looked at the snowy scene. But then Enzo held my hand. Carl will always carry his mother's surname, it won't change. When he said this, Oliver looked shocked. Enzo Fisher, can you really do that? I couldn't help but look at him too. Time will tell. Anyone can say nice things and make promises, but who can keep them? Oliver's face turned even darker. Enzo chuckled lightly. Indeed, anyone can make promises, Mr. Wadeson, you and your grandfather should know this best. Oliver's face gradually turned pale. Yes, his grandfather had once promised everything. In the end, it all came to nothing. When Grandpa entrusted me to him, he also promised to take good care of me and help guard the Como family. But in the end, I felt relieved. Finally, at this moment, completely relieved. We hope for returns, so we end up utterly disappointed. When we expect nothing in return, God gives us the best arrangement. For example, he sent Enzo to my side. After my marriage with Enzo was settled, he naturally started staying at the Como house. Still the same bedroom. Still the same tranquil nights. The only difference was, Enzo's face was not covered with a black silk band. We both had a little to drink. A bit tipsy, I pushed him onto the sofa and looked at him seriously for the first time. What are you thinking about? Wondering why you're doing this? A life-saving grace that can't be repaid. Of course, I can only offer myself. Offering yourself is a loss for me, isn't it? Enzo laughed. hugging me and resting his chin on my neck. Anthea, it's my fault. Of course, it's your fault. You don't know how much I disliked you. You don't know how much I love you. Are you really letting Carl take my surname? Of course. What if I don't want to have more children in the future? Then we won't have any. But the Fisher and Kraus families only have you as a child. We have Carl. But his surname is Como. Does it matter? Enzo lowered his head and kissed me lightly. Isn't he still my child? Doesn't he carry the blood of the Fisher and Kraus families? Few people can think so clearly. Everyone cares about different things. I couldn't help but smile, holding his face, just like that night, and asked him, "Have you bathed?" "Yes, Mississippi." "Then, take off your clothes." He also smiled, pulled me up, and then stood up. In the warm house, Enzo raised his hand and unbuttoned his shirt. The hem of his shirt was swiftly pulled out, followed by the belt. But this time I didn't look away. I watched until the end. He coughed lightly, his heated gaze sliding over my face. "Anthea, girls should still be a bit reserved." I laughed and threw myself into his arms. "Are you shy?" Enzo caught me steadily and whispered in my ear, "Miss, this time, can I kiss you?" I didn't answer, but stood on tiptoe and kissed him.